Hi there, this is Eric from Xrp. Welcome to this Starklings Side-Quest series, where we'll walk you through the basics of learning Cairo. If you're not familiar with Starklings, it's a fun and easy way to get started with the basics of Cairo. The lessons are presented in these small exercises that build upon each other. To get started, you'll need to clone the repo and compile it. All the links are in the description, and if you have any issues getting started, feel free to reach out to us for some help. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so hopefully you've been able to get Starklings up and running by cloning the repo and compiling it. Now we're at the last step where we run the final command, which is this one here, in the terminal to get it to start. So let's go ahead and do that. And if successful, you should get a message that says that your code is compiling and that everything is successfully run. When you haven't really done anything, it's just the very first intro exercise. So let's get started and look at that. So if you look at this intro exercise, essentially, it's just going to walk you through how the whole concept works. Here, comment it out. And when you are done with the exercise, when you think you've solved it and you're ready to move on, you can just remove the I am not done comment and then save it, and you will automatically move on to the next exercise. As you see here in the progress bar, we were on exercise 1, now we're on exercise 2. And in this particular one, so if we go to the next intro exercise, there is nothing there. So if you look at the compiler, it says something about the function with suffix main to run not found. So it looks like it's just an empty file. So let's go ahead and enter function main and see what happens. And just like that, we're able to get this compiling, and then that's it. We can move into the real exercise. So we just did the intro exercises. Let's go ahead and move on to the first exercise. And as we see here, we can see where the path of the exercise is. It's an exercise variables1.cairo. So we just go here on the left, expand our folder. First, let's take a look at the README. And let's take a quick look at that. And essentially, it's just telling us that in Cairo, variables are immutable by default. So when a variable is immutable, once a value is bound to a name, you can't change that value. However, you can make them mutable by adding the mute keyword in front of the variable name. However, it is important to clarify that even though the variable can be mutable, Cairo works with an immutable memory model, meaning that change in the value of a variable will not change the value in memory, but rather assign a new memory location to that variable. So that's something to keep in mind. And they have some further documentation for you to read through. I highly recommend it. 3 links here that take you basically to the Cairo book. Yeah, let's get started with exercise 1. So we click here. And we see we have a very basic function or function main with a print statement and what seems to be a variable assignment declaration, but we see it's not compiling. And we can take a closer look at the errors. And the first thing we see here is that the identifier is not found. And then we see that there's an invalid left-hand side of assignment. Yeah, so if you're familiar with Rust, you know that to assign a variable, you need to use the let keyword. So let's try that, see if it works in Cairo as well. And there you go. It's that easy. So it just shows us that obviously we have to use the let keyword to assign a variable. And then in the next line, we print x is 5. So once again, don't forget, remove your I am not done comment, and we can move on to the next exercise. So here, we don't have much for instructions, but we do get a hint if we want it, but let's see if we can figure it out without it. So here we have let x and nothing else, and then we have a conditional statement of if x is equal to 10, print x is 10, else print x is not 10. So if we remember in the previous exercise, we were missing the let keyword, but in this case, it seems like we're missing the value that we want to assign to x. So that should be pretty simple to figure out, right? We just add this, and let's add a value of 10 and save this. Let's see if it compiles, and it does. So we also get the printout that says x is 10. So just for fun, let's make x not 10, and yeah, it prints out correctly, x is not 10. So again, it's a pretty simple exercise, just reminding us how to assign a value to a variable. And don't forget to remove the comment, and that's it. Okay, let's take a look at variables 3. So if we look at the exercise here, we see it's another very simple function with just a couple of lines of code, but we see a new syntax. And we see that instead of having the assignment operator, we see a semicolon and then a felt 252. In this case, what we're looking at here is essentially the type declaration. And this is useful when we want to be more explicit with the compiler and letting the compiler know what type we are using. Most of the time, the compiler will just infer and just set a default type. But if we want to be explicit, we can. And sometimes it's also helpful when you're just starting out to remember what types you're using is to declare it in this way. Just an easy way for you to keep track of what you're doing. In this case, all we have to do again is add the assignment operator at the value that we want. We'll use 10 again. And if we save that, it should compile. And there we go, it's compiling. And just to be explicit, I'll show you that it will work also without the type declaration, as we've done already a couple of times. It will compile without any issues. Again, most of the time you don't need to use the type declaration, but it is handy to know how to do it, and the compiler will let you know when it is something that you do need to do. All right, that's it. Let's move on to the next one. Okay, now let's take a look at variables 4. So here we have a couple of lines of code, but we have a comment here that says don't change this line. So we see first we assign x to 3 here, then we have a print statement, and then we try to reassign x to 5. But our compiler isn't happy, our code isn't happy, because it says cannot assign an immutable variable. So as we first talked about, by default, variables are immutable. So what do we need to do to make it mutable? We just add the mute keyword. Let's see if that works. And there we go. So you can see that it's correctly printing out x is 3, and then we reassign 5 to x, and then x is now 5. And that's it. We've got this compiling, and we can move on to the next exercise. Okay, let's look at variables 5. So here we see that our code is not compiling, and we've got a couple of comments in the code that say do not change this line here, and do not rename this variable. So the problem we're having here is that it looks like we're trying to reassign the value of number, but it's not mutable, right? So let's try that first. And let's see if that works. But wait, didn't it just say not to change this line? So we kind of cheated, right? We're not supposed to change this line. So how do we fix this? What can we do? So in Cairo, there's something called shadowing, which allows you to change the variable name or even type without declaring mutability, because what you're doing actually is just creating a whole new variable. And it can be helpful in a lot of different cases. And it's something that's a little bit tricky at times to understand, especially at the beginning. But using shadowing is more efficient in a lot of different ways. But you just do that by redeclaring it. And if you just put let again in front of number, it becomes a whole new variable. It's still compiling, and you did not change line 8 like we did the first time with mutability. Okay, so now we're moving on to our final exercise in variables, variable 6. Here, for the first time, we're seeing something called a const, which is essentially, as you can guess, a constant that is a type of variable that is essentially always immutable. It can never be changed. So let's take a look at the errors and see if we can see something as to what the problem is. So it says unexpected token expected a colon followed by a type. So that's pretty straightforward. So remember in our previous exercise, we declared, or we had the type declaration as a felt 252. So one other thing that's different about constants is that they always have to be type declared. You always have to declare their type. So in this case, what we'll do is declare the type. And we can do that by adding the colon and adding the type. And let's do that over here as well. So if we do that, it works. But note that if you try to change this to something else, let's say a U16, it won't compile anymore. So the key takeaway for constants here is that they are always immutable and the types have to be explicitly declared. Okay, that's it for this exercise. Thank you so much for joining us on this session. We went through all of the 6 variable exercises, and we will continue doing these, and I hope you enjoyed it. And we will see you back soon.